Malik Carter never imagined that what was supposed to be a simple flight would become one of the most humiliating experiences of his life. That morning, he had arrived at River Grove International Airport with a light heart and a small carry-on bag. The spring air was warm and he was in high spirits, excited to fly out to Summit City to surprise his mother for her birthday. The day ahead was supposed to be full of joy, laughter, and family. Instead, it unraveled into something unthinkable. While waiting at the check-in area, Malik stood quietly in line like every other traveler. But as he approached the counter, the atmosphere shifted. The uniformed airline staff, working for a well-known regional carrier, gave him a look that said more than words ever could, a quick glance that sized him up, judged him, and dismissed him all in the same breath. Then came the first blow. "Step aside, sir," said the woman behind the counter, her voice flat, tight with something she didn't bother to hide. Her name tag read Pamela Brooks. Her tone was sharp, her smile forced. "There's an issue with your payment. We'll need to sort it out before you can check in." Malik blinked. There must be a mistake. "I booked this ticket using my corporate account. I've flown with this same card plenty of times." He reached for his phone, pulled up the confirmation email, and offered it to her. Pamela gave it a half glance, then waved dismissively. "The system is the system," she said, already turning to the next person in line. "You'll have to wait over there." A few people in line gave him puzzled looks. One man furrowed his brow in silent support. Another woman shifted uncomfortably and looked away. Malik stepped to the side, swallowing the growing knot in his stomach. He had encountered this kind of passive hostility before, where you weren't screamed at or cursed out, but where it was made perfectly clear you weren't welcome. But Pamela had no idea who he was. No one did. Because Malik Carter was not just another traveler. He was the majority owner of this very airline, a fact he had kept deliberately quiet. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood in Southwick, a suburb with more grit than glamour, Malik knew from a young age that people didn't expect much from someone who looked like him. His teachers often told him he was well-spoken, like it was a surprise. Landlords gave vague excuses about credit concerns. Even childhood friends from other parts of town raised eyebrows when he mentioned attending a top-tier university on a full scholarship. Despite all that, Malik thrived. In his early 20s, he co-founded a tech startup with a former MIT roommate. The company specialized in building advanced software for aviation and aerospace systems. What began in a cramped apartment grew rapidly, thanks to Malik's sharp intuition, tireless work ethic, and an eye for opportunity. Within 5 years, the startup had scaled into a multi-million-dollar operation. But Malik wasn't content with just one success. He diversified. Investments in hospitality, logistics, and most recently, aviation, including a failing regional airline desperate for new leadership. The company, once a small charter service, had overexpanded and lost its way. Malik saw potential. He saw a brand worth saving. So he acquired majority shares through his private firm, quietly assuming control of the airline behind the scenes. There were no press releases, no photo ops. Malik preferred it that way. If no one recognized him, he could see the business from the inside, raw and unfiltered. He wanted the truth. How did employees treat passengers? Were the company's values, the ones printed in the glossy brochures, actually upheld? So today, like he'd done before, he planned to fly incognito. No VIP treatment, no corporate badge, just another man on a plane. And that's how he found himself at Gate C-32, bag slung over his shoulder, watching how it all played out. But this time, things were different. This time, the problem started before he even reached the gate. The kiosk refused to process his boarding pass. He thought it was a tech glitch. Nothing new, but after trying twice, he walked over to the staffed check-in desk where Pamela sat. She didn't recognize him. Few people outside the executive level did, and that was the point. But instead of offering help, she treated him like a nuisance. She tapped at her keyboard with obvious annoyance. "Carter, you said?" "Yes." "Malik Carter." Her brow furrowed as she squinted at the screen. "Looks like there's a flag on this ticket. Could be a payment hold or some other issue. I'm going to have to call someone." Malik remained calm. "That's fine. I'll wait right here." Minutes passed, then 10, then 15. Eventually, a tall man in a dark blazer arrived. He glanced at Malik like one might inspect a scuff on their shoe. "I'm Greg Stanton," he said, without introducing his role. "Let me see your ID." Malik handed over his driver's license. Greg glanced at it, mumbled something under his breath, then typed a few things into the computer. Finally, he muttered, "You're good. Might have been a system glitch. Hurry up to your gate. They're boarding soon. No apology, no courtesy, just a dismissive wave." Malik took his printed pass and walked toward security with a deep breath. He reminded himself why he was doing this, to see firsthand how real customers were being treated. And what he saw today was a problem. If someone like him, quiet, respectful, fully paid, was being treated this way, how many others were facing worse? Pamela Brooks barely looked up from her monitor. She glanced at Malik's screen just long enough to spot his name, then waved him off like he was a persistent salesman. "System says no," she said curtly. "Move to the side, please. We have other passengers to assist." Her words sliced through the terminal air, drawing attention. A few in line glanced over, some with curiosity, others with discomfort at the tension unfolding. One woman gave Malik a look of sympathy before quickly looking away. Malik, maintaining a practiced smile, nodded politely. "Understood. I'd really appreciate it if you could try again, though. I flew last week with the same card and had no problems. Might just be a tech issue." Pamela exhaled with exaggerated patience, her fingers tapping noisily against the keyboard. She paused, squinting at the screen, then leaned back in her chair. "There's a flag on your ticket." "Not sure what it's about," she said, shrugging. "Can't check you in at this time. I'll need to call a supervisor." Malik felt a quiet ripple of confusion and unease settle in his gut. In all his years of travel, he'd never heard of a flagged ticket with no explanation. Still, he kept calm. "No problem," he replied, stepping aside to allow the next passenger through. "I'll wait." 5 minutes ticked by. Then 10. Then 15. The line thinned out and passengers moved along while Malik remained in limbo. Finally, Pamela called for backup. A tall man in a navy jacket arrived, his face set in a line of perpetual annoyance. He walked with quick, clipped steps, posture rigid like someone always halfway to a complaint. "I'm Ethan Ward," he said without offering a smile. "Let me see your ID." Malik handed him his driver's license. Ethan scanned it briefly, muttered under his breath, then jabbed a few keys with visible frustration. "It's fine now," Ethan grumbled. "Must have been a random error. You'll want to get to your gate. Flight leaves in 30 minutes. And with that, he turned and walked away. Not a word of apology or basic courtesy. Malik inhaled slowly, grounding himself. This wasn't about a glitch. It was a test of patience, a subtle form of resistance. He picked up his carry-on and headed toward security. If they treated just any passenger this way, how many stories like his were unfolding unnoticed without any power to speak back? After making it through the TSA checkpoint, Malik arrived at Gate C32. It was relatively calm, with just a few travelers lounging in nearby seats. A bright digital sign above the counter read, "Flight 204 to Summit City. On time." He found a quiet seat near the window and pulled out a business magazine. Though he'd read it before, he flipped through the pages, eyes discreetly watching the staff's behavior at the gate. Behind the counter, a gate agent was speaking to another passenger, his tone brusque and impatient. His badge read, "Jordan Kemp." Malik watched as the man typed furiously into the system, muttering something about a delay in seat assignments. Malik frowned. That was odd. Seat assignments should have been finalized already, especially for business class. Was the flight overbooked? Soon, the boarding announcement sounded overhead, calling passengers by zone. Malik, holding a business class ticket, stood and made his way to the priority lane. He handed his boarding pass to Jordan, who scanned it. The scanner let out a shrill beep. The screen turned red. Jordan's expression twisted instantly. "It's not scanning," he said, voice flat. "Let me see that." Malik passed over the boarding pass, now beginning to feel the tension climb inside his chest. Jordan tapped at the computer, his brow furrowing deeper. "Yeah, this says you're not in business class," he said, his voice rising just a bit. "You'll need to head to economy, or step aside." Malik's confusion turned to disbelief. "Excuse me?" he asked calmly. "I purchased a business class seat. My email receipt shows that clearly." Jordan's eyes narrowed. "Listen," he said, with a snide tilt to his voice. "If you can't afford the upgrade, you shouldn't try to cheat the system. This lane's for real business class passengers." His voice was loud enough to draw glances from nearby travelers. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with growing unease. Malik felt a wave of heat flush his face. He'd dealt with these kinds of assumptions before, the kind masked as policy but deeply rooted in prejudice, the kind that told someone like him they didn't belong in a premium space. He took a breath. There must be a mistake. "Could you double-check the payment details? I assure you—" "I don't need to check anything," Jordan snapped, cutting him off. "If you can't prove it now, you're not boarding in this class. Step aside." Malik stood frozen for a beat, trying to keep his composure. He reached for his wallet, pulling out the same corporate card he'd used dozens of times. "I can show you right now," he said. "It's on file. This is the same card I used to purchase." "I said, step aside." Jordan barked. "We've got a flight to board. If you don't cooperate, we'll have you removed entirely." A stunned hush fell across the line. People turned, some openly watching, others lowering their eyes. A few phones began to quietly record. Then came a voice, soft, hesitant, but brave. "Excuse me," a young woman said. She stepped forward from the line, holding a toddler in one arm. "I think you're being unfair. He said he has proof." Jordan turned on her with a sneer. "Ma'am, stay out of this. You want to get on this plane or not?" She stepped back quickly, face pale. Malik gave her a small, reassuring nod. He didn't want her dragged into this. His hand rested firmly on the counter as he set down his card and unlocked his phone. "Scan the card. Check the records. You'll see I paid for this seat." For a moment, Jordan hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. He took the card, typed in the number, and stared at the screen. There it was. The transaction. Full fare. Business class. Jordan's jaw tightened, and his voice dropped. "It's on file." But the seat didn't register. "Might have been a glitch," he muttered. "That's what I've been trying to explain," Malik said, his tone calm but edged. But Jordan wasn't ready to concede. "Well," he snapped, "business class is full now. All I've got is a seat in economy. Take it or don't fly." The tension thickened around them. A man behind Malik muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous." And it was. But somehow, it still wasn't the worst part of Malik's journey. Not yet. The young woman with the child hesitated, glancing between Malik and Jordan Kemp, the gate agent. "I think you're being unfair," she said gently, her voice almost a whisper. "He said he can show you proof." Jordan whipped his head around to face her, a sharp glare cutting through the air. "Ma'am, stay out of this," he snapped. "You want to get on this plane or not?" She shrank back, eyes wide, hugging her toddler closer. She looked at Malik, her face full of apology she didn't have words for. He gave her a quick nod, a quiet signal not to get involved further. He appreciated her courage, but he wouldn't let her sacrifice her travel plans for his battle. Malik turned back to Jordan, setting his corporate card and unlocked phone gently on the counter. "Scan the card," he said, voice even but tense. "Check the records. You'll see I purchased a business class ticket." Jordan's jaw flexed. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty passed across his face. He snatched the card with visible irritation and typed the numbers into the terminal. A beep. Then silence. Jordan's eyes lingered on the screen, and something shifted in his expression. The briefest glimpse of surprise. Without a word, he shoved the card back toward Malik and lowered his voice, clearly hoping others nearby wouldn't hear. "Well, it shows the payment went through," he muttered. But something happened with the seat assignment, probably an old system glitch. "That's exactly what I've been trying to explain," Malik said, the steel in his tone barely restrained. His words were measured, but the injustice gnawed at every syllable. Jordan didn't apologize, didn't offer a solution. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked Malik square in the eye. "Business class is full now," he said bluntly. "Only seat left is in economy. You can take it, or you're not flying today." Silence swept through the gate area like a cold wind. Malik could feel the tension, almost taste it in the air. This wasn't just a glitch. This was about control, about keeping someone like him out of a place he supposedly didn't belong. The idea of revealing his identity flickered in his mind. Just saying it, "I own this airline." But something told him to wait, to let it play out a little further, to see if anyone would step up and do the right thing. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said, keeping his tone civil. "But trust me, I'll be filing a complaint." Jordan sneered. "Do what you want. Now step out of the way." Behind him, an older man let out a loud scoff. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head as he moved toward the line. Malik walked toward the economy boarding lane, each step heavy with disbelief. What had just happened wasn't simply inconvenient. It was humiliating. And yet, it still wasn't the worst part of his journey. Once on board the narrow-body aircraft, Malik scanned the rows until he reached his assigned seat. Row 29, center seat, squeezed between the window and aisle passengers. He dropped his duffel into the overhead bin and sat down with a quiet sigh. Flying coach wasn't the issue. He'd done it often when he chose to. But being forced into it, after having rightfully paid for more, was something else entirely. His seatmates acknowledged him politely, a young woman in a soft hoodie already tucking away her earbuds, and an elderly man gripping a carved cane. Their warmth provided a flicker of calm amid the rising storm. Malik tried to relax. Just get through the flight. But peace wouldn't last long. Not even 10 minutes after sitting down, he saw Jordan Kemp striding down the aisle with a woman by his side. She wore her dark hair tightly pinned and had a severe, expressionless face. Her name badge read Lena Morrell. Malik's body stiffened. He didn't know why they were approaching, but his gut churned. They stopped right at his row. "Sir," Lena said, lips pressed into a thin line, "there's an issue with your carry-on bag. It's too large for the overhead compartment." Malik stared at her, bewildered. "That bag?" he asked. "I've traveled with it for years. It fits in every standard overhead bin." Lena reached up and gave the bin a theatrical push, as if struggling with it. "It doesn't look regulation size," she said. "We'll need to gate check it, or, if you're not willing, you'll have to exit the plane." Passengers nearby perked up, craning their necks to watch the exchange. The overhead bin was shut, flush with the frame. Nothing about it appeared oversized, but Lena clearly had no intention of being fair. Malik opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut in. "Excuse me," said Carlos, a younger flight attendant, stepping in from the aisle. He'd been assisting a family a few rows up, but had seen the commotion. "I just helped a passenger stow that bag. It's well within the limit." He reached up, opened the bin, and adjusted the bag slightly. "It's smaller than most rollers we've got up front." Lena turned to him sharply, her eyes flashing. "We have policies, Carlos. Thank you, but we'll handle this." Carlos looked stunned, but nodded reluctantly and backed away. Malik turned back to Lena and Jordan, feeling the pressure of every eye on him. "Is there a reason you're targeting my bag when it clearly fits?" he asked, voice calm but heavy with frustration. Lena's lips barely moved. "Gate check it, or leave the plane." "I want your names," Malik said, now louder. "This is harassment, plain and simple." Jordan crossed his arms. "Call it what you want. We're following procedure. My colleague just told you there's nothing wrong with my bag," Malik said. "And I have a right to know why you're continuing to single me out." Lena's face flushed. She looked toward the front of the plane. "If you won't cooperate, we'll be forced to involve security." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the rows. The situation was spiraling. Malik clenched his fists in his lap, the sting of injustice searing into his bones. It wasn't just about a seat or a bag anymore. It was about who they believed deserved to be here and who didn't. "My colleague just said there's no problem with my bag," Malik stated, his voice firm but not raised. "This is clearly harassment." Lena Morell's cheeks flushed, the color rising to her temples. Without responding to the logic or the facts, she turned to Jordan Kemp beside her. "Let's call security," she muttered, low and clipped. "If he won't comply, we'll have him removed." Malik's pulse thundered in his ears. Removed over a properly stowed bag after being bumped from a seat he paid for with zero explanation? He wasn't imagining it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. The hostility was deliberate now. Tension gripped the cabin like a tightened drum. A few nearby passengers began murmuring, some sitting straighter in their seats to watch. Others pulled out their phones, quietly recording. Then came a voice, sharp and indignant, from several rows ahead. "You can't do that," an older woman snapped. "He's not breaking any rules. Leave him alone." A man in a suit leaned across the aisle. "This is outrageous," he said, voice loud enough for several rows to hear. "Let the man fly. He's done nothing wrong." Lena's eyes darted nervously around the plane. The energy had shifted. The crowd wasn't with them anymore. Jordan, unwilling to back down, turned abruptly and marched toward the front cabin, presumably to summon backup. Lena stood frozen in place, lips pressed into a line, watching Malik as though daring him to say more. Within a few minutes, the plane's front door reopened, and a new presence entered the aisle. Tall, uniformed, and unmistakably authoritative. Officer Jalen Price, a seasoned airport security officer, walked with calm but decisive steps, his earpiece flicking gently against his collar as he scanned the rows. His posture softened slightly when his eyes landed on Malik, who sat still, his carry-on untouched in the overhead bin. "What's going on here?" Officer Price asked. Before Malik could respond, Jordan cut in. "This passenger is being non-compliant," he said hastily, pointing toward Malik. He refused to check an oversized bag and was previously disruptive at the gate. Malik locked eyes with Officer Price and spoke calmly, evenly. "All I did was present my paid ticket for business class. I was downgraded to economy without explanation. Now they're saying my carry-on doesn't fit, even though it's stored correctly. A fellow crew member confirmed it fits just fine. I've done everything I was asked." A wave of agreement rose around them, voices from the surrounding rows murmuring their support. "He's telling the truth," one man said. "I saw it. They're targeting him," another woman added. "That bag is smaller than half the others," muttered a teenager recording with her phone. Officer Price looked up at the overhead compartment, then down at Malik. Then he turned to Lena and Jordan. "That's a standard carry-on," he said plainly. "It fits just fine. I see no issue here." He paused, waiting. "Is there something else going on, something I haven't been made aware of?" Lena's mouth opened, then shut again. She turned slightly toward Jordan, searching for something to lean on. Jordan shifted uncomfortably, his confidence faltering. "We're authorized to remove any passenger who's disruptive or refuses to follow crew instructions," he said. This man was aggressive at the gate. Malik opened his mouth to speak, but Officer Price held up a hand. Gently. "Sir," he said, looking back at him, "let me ask you directly. Are you refusing any safety-related instructions or violating any policy that pertains to the operation of this flight?" "No," Malik answered. "Not at all. I've complied with everything. I just want to sit here and fly to Summit City." The officer gave a small nod. Then, turning back to the flight crew, he exhaled. "Unless there's a clear safety risk or legitimate policy violation, I won't remove a paying passenger from this plane." "That's not protocol." Jordan's face flushed deep red. Lena's jaw tensed. They had been counting on an ally. They didn't get one. "Fine," Jordan snapped. "We'll handle it internally then, through the airline's channels." Officer Price gave a polite nod to Malik. "Sir, I hope you have a safe flight." And with that, he turned and exited the aircraft. As the door shut and the cabin pressure began to settle again, Malik leaned back in his seat, his breath shallow, heart still hammering from the adrenaline. He had faced worse, yes, but rarely this brazen, rarely this public. He should have been in a spacious business class seat, sipping coffee, preparing to surprise his mother. Instead, he was jammed into the narrow middle row of a crowded plane, treated like a nuisance, a liar, an intruder. All because of how he looked, how they assumed he couldn't belong. He reached row 29, glanced again at the seat number, and slowly sat. He tried to gather his breath. Across from him, the young woman in the hoodie smiled softly, tucking away her laptop. On his other side, the elderly man with the cane gave a respectful nod. They hadn't spoken up, but their energy was kind. Malik appreciated that more than they knew. He double-checked that his duffel fit flush inside the bin, and it did exactly as always. Then he settled in, scrolling through emails on his phone, trying to ground himself in something familiar. The plane buzzed with its usual hum, voices, movement, the quiet chatter of attendants. For a moment it seemed things might actually settle. But then, "Excuse me, sir." The voice cut through the cabin, sharp and unmistakable. Jordan Kemp was back, storming down the aisle with Lena right behind him. Malik looked up, jaw tightening. He didn't know what they wanted now, but he knew one thing for sure. It wasn't over yet. Another flight attendant followed close behind Jordan Kemp, this time a woman whose expression was all sharp edges and suspicion. Her chestnut hair was coiled tightly in a bun, not a strand out of place. Her name tag read Lena Morrell. Jordan stopped at Malik's row like a soldier reporting for confrontation, arms crossed as if bracing for a battle. Lena stood beside him, her narrowed eyes scanning Malik from head to toe. Malik felt the familiar grip of dread settle in his chest. "Can I help you?" he asked, managing a polite tone despite the strain in his voice. Lena cleared her throat and pointed toward the closed overhead bin above his seat. "There's a problem with your carry-on bag," she announced. "It's too large for the cabin. You'll need to check it." Caught off guard, Malik frowned. "That bag?" he said slowly. "I've brought it on dozens of flights. It fits in every overhead bin. I placed it up there myself. It's not sticking out. Is there a new policy I'm unaware of?" Lena didn't blink. Instead, she made a dramatic show of tugging at the bin's latch, as if attempting to force it shut, though it was already securely closed. "It's clearly not standard size," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "We'll need to gate check it, or you'll have to leave the aircraft." A rumble of low voices spread among the nearby passengers. Heads turned. Phones began to quietly rise into filming position. People shifted in their seats to get a better look. Malik's cheeks burned. He knew, and everyone watching knew, this wasn't about a bag. This was retaliation. A continuation of the same bias and condescension he'd endured at the gate. Before he could speak, a familiar voice cut in. "Is there a problem here?" asked Carlos, the young flight attendant who had been helping another family a few rows up. His brow was furrowed with concern. Lena let out a sharp sigh, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Yes, there is," she snapped. "This gentleman's bag is too large for the overhead." Carlos blinked, then glanced up at the bin. He reached up and opened it, gently pulling the bag toward him for inspection. It slid out easily. "It looks fine to me," he said carefully. "I've seen larger bags up front. This is under the size limit." Lena's face darkened. She turned her gaze on Carlos with an intensity that practically dared him to say another word. "We have strict guidelines," she hissed. "I'm trying to follow protocol." Malik's hands curled into fists on his lap. He was angry, but he couldn't afford to be reckless, not with so many eyes on him. "Do you have a measuring tape?" he asked, voice steady. "A sizing tool? I'm more than happy to let you check the dimensions if you truly believe it's oversized." His words were reasonable, but the message underneath was clear. Stop making excuses. Eyes flicked toward Jordan, who had remained silent through the exchange. His arms were still crossed, jaw clenched. Carlos, now clearly uncomfortable, took a half-step back. "I didn't see an issue," he murmured, "but I'll let you two handle it." He retreated toward the front of the plane, leaving Lena and Jordan to escalate things further. Lena turned back to Malik, her expression hardening. "I'm insisting we gate-check this bag," she said. "Either you comply or we'll have to ask you to leave the flight. Your choice." That same wave of disbelief washed over Malik again. That same, "How is this happening?" feeling he'd known too many times in his life. He leaned forward slightly, meeting both of their eyes. "This is harassment," he said, his voice trembling not from fear, but from the restraint it took to stay composed. "You both know this bag fits. Your colleague just confirmed it in front of everyone." He looked around the cabin. All eyes were on them. "I'd like your names, please." Passengers were openly watching now. One or two phones were recording. The young woman in the sweatshirt beside Malik had taken off her headphones. The older gentleman with the cane shook his head in silent disapproval. Someone a row behind whispered, "Unbelievable." Jordan finally spoke again, sneering. "I'm Jordan, and this is Lena. It doesn't matter what you think. We're following airline policy." Malik shook his head slowly. "No, you're not. You're singling me out. This has nothing to do with any real rule. And you know it." Lena's face turned crimson. She glanced around, suddenly aware of the number of passengers documenting everything on their phones. Perhaps she realized how quickly this could go viral, how damning this scene already appeared to be. Still, she wouldn't back down. "Jordan," she said tightly, her voice now carrying a hint of panic beneath the composure, "we need to escalate this. He's defying instructions." Jordan nodded curtly. "Let's get airport security. We're not waiting." A low wave of anxious murmurs swept across the cabin. The tension was unbearable now, so thick it pulled people out of their personal bubbles and into this confrontation. Passengers who had tried to ignore it were now clearly transfixed. Some whispered to one another. Others just shook their heads, stunned by what they were witnessing. And Malik? His heart pounded as he sat there, trying to keep himself from exploding with rage. This wasn't about a bag, or a seat, or a misunderstanding. This was about what they saw when they looked at him, and what they refused to see. Across the aisle, a man in a sharp gray suit sat forward, finally breaking his silence. "This is outrageous," he said calmly, but firmly. "Let him keep his bag. That's outrageous. Let him keep his bag." The man in the business suit didn't raise his voice, but it carried weight, the kind that silenced murmurs and made people listen. Others around him murmured in agreement. A woman nodded, arms crossed in protest. Another voice echoed from a few rows up. "This is harassment, pure and simple." Jordan Kemp grimaced, realizing he was rapidly losing control. He couldn't bully the entire plane into silence, so he turned sharply and stormed down the aisle toward the cockpit. Within minutes, the cabin door opened again. This time, it wasn't a flight attendant. It was Officer Jalen Price, broad-shouldered and steady, his uniform crisp, earpiece in place. He stepped aboard, scanning the rows with a practiced calm. The hum of the cabin dropped into uneasy silence. "What's the situation here?" he asked, his eyes moving from passenger to passenger, eventually landing on Jordan, who stood waiting like a child prepared to tattle. Jordan was quick to speak, pointing toward Malik. "This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions," he said. "His bag's too big for the overhead, and he caused a disruption earlier at the gate." Malik met the officer's gaze calmly. "My bag is within standard size," he said. "It fits cleanly in the overhead compartment. A flight attendant confirmed it. As for the gate, all I did was present my paid business class ticket. They downgraded me without cause, and now, after being seated, I'm being targeted again. Around them, voices rose again. He's telling the truth. The bag fits fine. I saw it. They're targeting him." Officer Price looked up, opened the overhead bin himself, and examined the bag in question. It fit neatly. No bulging edges. No reason to question it. He turned a measured gaze toward Jordan and Lena Morrell, who stood behind him with stiff shoulders and flushed faces. "This is clearly a standard-size carry-on," the officer said. "I don't see any violation here." He paused, allowing space for any other explanations. "Unless he's breaking a safety rule," Officer Price continued, "or refusing a direct lawful order related to flight operations, I can't remove him from the plane." Lena's eyes darted toward Jordan for support. Jordan's face was pinched, his earlier confidence waning. "He was belligerent at the gate," Jordan muttered weakly. Price didn't look convinced. He turned back to Malik. "Sir, are you refusing any instructions that relate to flight safety or conduct?" "Not at all," Malik replied evenly. "I've followed every instruction. I just want to fly to Summit City like everyone else." The officer studied the scene again. The anxious tension from the crew, the growing frustration from passengers, the calm composure of the man being accused. He finally gave a quiet nod. "All right, sir," he said. "You have a safe flight." He glanced back at Lena and Jordan. "If there's no policy breach or safety issue, there's no reason for further disruption." With that, Officer Price stepped off the aircraft. But peace didn't follow. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed. Flight attendants moved mechanically, preparing for takeoff, yet Jordan wasn't done. His jaw set, he stalked back toward the cockpit, disappearing behind the galley curtain with Lena. Moments later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay. Please remain in your seats." Malik's stomach sank. He knew that tone. That delay wasn't about air traffic or mechanical checks. Something else was coming. Sure enough, the cabin door reopened, and a new figure stepped on board, a flight supervisor, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. She walked straight down the aisle and stopped in front of Malik. "Mr. Carter, we're going to need you to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft," she said. The cabin filled with sharp intakes of breath. Cameras began recording again. "On what grounds?" Malik asked quietly. "There's been a report of threatening behavior," the supervisor replied, not meeting his eyes. "We're unable to continue the flight with you on board." A beat of silence passed before the cabin erupted. "This is ridiculous," someone shouted. "He hasn't done anything wrong. I have this on video. He was calm the whole time." But none of it mattered. Malik stood slowly, dignified, hurt, furious. The final blow of humiliation burned deeper than anything before, not just because they were forcing him off the plane, but because they were doing it under a false accusation, one that would be nearly impossible for the average person to fight. He could have shouted the truth right then and there. "I own this airline." But instead, he turned, head high, and walked toward the door. Each step a storm of injustice brewing under the surface. He had been underestimated before, humiliated. But this would spark change. Back in the terminal, Malik sat down at an empty gate, still gripping his phone. His heart pounded, his fingers trembled. Then he dialed. The voice that answered was calm and familiar. "Malik, did you land already?" came Ava Sinclair's voice, his trusted advisor, legal strategist, and longtime friend from business school. He exhaled hard. I didn't even take off. What happened? He told her everything. The denied seat, the false claims about his bag, the threat of removal, the crowd, the security officer, and finally the forced deplaning. By the time he finished, Ava's voice had hardened. That's outrageous. Did you tell them who you are? Not yet, Malik replied. I didn't want to escalate things on the plane, but it's time now. There was a long pause. Then Ava responded, calm but urgent. I'll schedule an emergency board meeting within the hour. We'll get legal on the line and the PR team standing by. You want me to contact the CEO, or do you want to handle it? I'll handle it, Malik said firmly. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had been dismissed, disrespected, and dehumanized by people wielding just enough power to make life harder, and no accountability to stop them. This isn't about a seat, Malik said. It's about the culture, and he was ready to change it. They removed you from the plane? Ava's voice crackled through Malik's phone, disbelief laced with fury. That's outrageous. Did you tell them who you are? Not yet, Malik said quietly. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from rage he'd worked hard to contain. But it's time. There was a pause on the line as Ava, ever the composed strategist, took in the weight of those words. Then she responded with brisk clarity. Understood. I'll call an emergency meeting with the executive board. You want the entire leadership team? All of them, Malik said. And get PR on standby. This is about to go public. Ava didn't hesitate. I'm on it. Should I contact the CEO? I'll do it myself, Malik replied, already scrolling through his contacts to call Elliot Granger, the airline's longtime CEO. Though Malik owned the controlling stake in the company, Elliot remained the public face, a legacy executive who had retained his title during the ownership transition. He was well-liked, if a little old-school. Malik dialed. The call connected almost immediately. Malik, Elliot answered warmly, clearly not expecting a crisis. Everything all right? There's a situation, Malik said, skipping any pleasantries. A serious one. Your staff racially profiled me and had me removed from a flight. There was a long silence. They what? You heard me, Malik said, his tone clipped. I had a paid business class ticket. They downgraded me without explanation, challenged my presence, then tried to remove me for carrying a bag that fit just fine. When I didn't back down, they called security, and ultimately a supervisor had me deplaned under false claims of threatening behavior. My God, Elliot muttered, are you safe? I'm safe. But I'm livid, Malik replied, and we have a problem on our hands that goes far beyond me. We need a board meeting, now. Elliot didn't push back. I'll gather them. Malik found an empty gate nearby, sat down, and began typing. Bullet points, names, quotes. Every detail of the humiliation he endured, from the passive-aggressive check-in to the public deplaning, captured cleanly, factually, with no embellishment needed. By the time the hour mark hit, he joined the video call. Faces populated the screen one by one. Ava, calm and focused. Elliot, pale and tense. Noah Blake, the CFO, already scrolling through financials. Marcia Cole, head of HR, the legal team, 2 PR directors, and a few regional executives who looked visibly uncomfortable. Let's begin, Malik said. He recounted the incident from start to finish. Pamela Brooks at check-in, Jordan Kemp at the gate, Lena Morell's attempts to force him to check his bag. Renee Dalton, the supervisor who ultimately removed him from the plane. He laid it out, name by name, moment by moment. Some board members were stunned, others quietly jotted notes, aware of the consequences that could follow. Then came the question from Noah Blake, the CFO. Do we have any witnesses? Video? Plenty, Malik said. Dozens of passengers watched. Some filmed it. I've already collected contact info from several. And let's not forget the airport security officer who got involved, Officer Jalen Price. He sided with me, said I was following policy, that there was no reason to remove me. Elliot rubbed a hand over his face. This is a PR nightmare. It's more than PR, Ava added pointedly. This is about systemic failure, discrimination, corporate culture, policy abuse. Marcia Cole, the HR lead, nodded slowly. We'll have to initiate a full investigation. We can't terminate anyone without process, but this incident alone warrants immediate suspension. Suspension? Malik snapped, his voice steady but razor sharp. That's the floor, not the ceiling. He let that hang in the air. They didn't just make a mistake, he continued. They assumed, judged, and punished me based on nothing but my appearance, and then they lied to justify their actions. He scanned the virtual room. I don't believe this was an isolated incident. The behavior at check-in, the flag on my ticket, the downgrade, the insistence that my bag didn't fit. These aren't coincidences. They're symptoms of a toxic culture. Heads nodded, though some board members looked wary, not of the problem, but of the cost of fixing it. I want immediate suspensions for Jordan Kemp, Lena Morrell, and Renee Dalton. Effective tonight, Malik said. I also want an internal review of every customer discrimination complaint from the past 3 years, especially ones that were dismissed or closed without action. Marcia scribbled furiously, already drafting a task force. DEI training isn't enough, Malik added. We need a full reset. New onboarding protocols, anonymous complaint tracking, mandatory escalation reviews, and a zero-tolerance policy that's actually enforced. Public statement? Asked one of the PR leads. Malik nodded. We won't spin this, he said. We own it. We tell the truth. We apologize, sincerely, and explain how we're going to make this right. And I'll make my own statement as majority owner. A pause followed. The PR lead looked hesitant. Are you sure? That's a big reveal? It's time, Malik said. Let the public see who's behind this airline, and let them see how we choose to lead. Elliot, finally finding his voice again, nodded. We'll support you fully, he said. This is going to be a storm. But if we do it right, it'll be a reckoning. And a rebirth. Malik looked into the camera, not blinking. We're not just fixing a moment, he said. We're changing the culture permanently. No sugarcoating, Malik said firmly. No spin. The apology needs to be honest and direct. We name what happened, and we lay out exactly what we're going to do about it. Across the boardroom monitor, Elliot Granger, the airline's CEO, nodded solemnly. The expression on his face had shifted from embarrassment to something closer to remorse. You're right, he said. We'll offer formal apologies to the passengers who were affected. Compensation where appropriate. And I'll personally oversee the rollout of the new digital seat assignment system, something that prevents gate agents from losing seat assignments ever again. Malik exhaled, feeling the smallest flicker of relief. He had bought into the company when it was on the brink of collapse, a failing airline with legacy debt and low morale. He'd seen potential and poured himself into rebuilding it. But now it was clear. The rot ran deeper than bad finances. The toxic culture, the quiet day-to-day bigotry that no spreadsheet could track, was the true cancer. And that required not just investment, but courage. I'm releasing a personal statement, Malik said, gaze unwavering. It'll come from me, not a spokesperson. I'll tell people the truth, who I am, what happened, and why this is bigger than me. This is about anyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. The meeting ended on that note, a quiet, determined resolve taking the place of corporate pleasantries. Some things were still uncertain, how the public would respond, how deep the scandal would run, whether the airline could survive the storm. But Malik wasn't backing down. For the first time, he would no longer fix things behind the scenes. He would stand in front of it all, visible, vulnerable, and unflinching. The next morning, the official statement was published, signed by Malik Carter, majority owner, and co-signed by CEO Elliot Granger. The reaction was immediate and explosive. News outlets picked it up within hours. Headlines screamed across homepages. Black airline owner removed from his own flight. Corporate power meets prejudice. Malik Carter speaks out. Social media went into overdrive. Hashtags like "Justice for Malik," "I'm flying while black," and "He owns the plane" trended for 2 days straight. Millions watched viral videos showing Jordan Kemp's snide dismissal at the gate, Lena Morrell trying to check a properly sized carry-on, and Renee Dalton delivering the final blow, the order for Malik to leave the plane. In every clip, Malik's composure was almost surreal. Calm, reasoned, never raising his voice, while those in uniform around him escalated unnecessarily. The irony struck people to the core. A man removed from a plane for not belonging when he owned the company. Activists called for boycotts unless the airline conducted a sweeping cultural review. Civil rights attorneys demanded disciplinary action, not just apologies. Customers flooded the airline's pages, pledging to cancel future bookings unless real change occurred. Business analysts speculated that Malik might become a historic example, not just of a leader confronting racism, but of a CEO rewriting the rules from inside the system. Malik's phone didn't stop buzzing. Calls came from every direction. Friends expressing outrage and support, journalists requesting interviews, organizations asking him to speak publicly. Even a few of his former professors reached out with heartfelt messages of pride. "It's rare to see someone in your position use their power like this," one of them wrote, "but it's exactly what makes it matter." While the airline's stock dipped briefly, it began to rebound almost as fast, as investors realized the public support might actually strengthen the brand long-term if handled ethically and boldly. The board, though cautious, stood behind Malik's plan. Lawsuits were filed by some passengers on the flight who claimed emotional distress from witnessing the incident. The airline prepared for court battles, not just over discrimination, but over trust. Meanwhile, Malik threw himself into the work. He approved refunds and travel credits for everyone on that flight. He arranged personalized apologies, even upgrades, for passengers who had spoken up during the confrontation. He also called Officer Jalen Price, the airport security officer who had refused to escalate the situation. "You handled yourself with integrity," Malik said on the call. "I just wanted to say thank you." Jalen was stunned. I had no idea who you were," he said, "but I knew something felt wrong. I just tried to follow the facts." Malik smiled. That's all any of us can ask. Behind the scenes, though, Malik wrestled with a cocktail of emotions. There was anger, of course, the kind that burned hot in his chest when he replayed the sneers and dismissals. But there was also clarity. He now understood, in a way he never had before, how deeply embedded the problem was. He'd lived it, on his own aircraft, with his own people. And strange as it was, there was even a sliver of gratitude, not for the experience itself, but for what it unearthed. The flight to see his mother had turned into a moment that could shift an entire industry. He wouldn't waste it. As the internal investigation began, testimonies rolled in from passengers and staff. Interviews were conducted, logs were pulled, complaint histories reviewed. What they uncovered was damning. Jordan Kemp had manually overridden Malik's seat in the system after seeing him at the gate. No cause noted. Lena Morrell had multiple prior complaints of selectively enforcing carry-on rules, especially toward passengers of color. Pamela Brooks, the check-in agent, had a track record of flagging travelers under vague claims of system errors, almost exclusively Black or Latino customers. Renee Dalton had defaulted to crew accounts without investigating, despite contradicting passenger statements. Every piece of data revealed the same truth. This wasn't new. It had simply been ignored until someone with the power to fight back got caught in it. The audit of the airline's digital logs was damning. The system didn't lie. Jordan Kemp had deliberately overridden Malik's original business class seat assignment moments after spotting him at the gate. He had flagged Malik as a suspicious passenger, a vague term, unsupported by any official documentation or protocol. But it didn't stop there. Lena Morell, the flight attendant who tried to force Malik to check his standard-size carry-on, had a history of targeting passengers of color for alleged seating or luggage violations. Several formal complaints had been lodged over the past 2 years, none of which had been followed up by management. Pamela Brooks, the check-in agent, was known internally for being cold toward minority travelers. But now, HR had unearthed repeated customer service complaints, many of them dismissed or brushed aside. Even Renee Dalton, the supervisor who removed Malik from the flight, had testimonies against her. While she hadn't accumulated many formal complaints, several employees admitted she often defaulted to trusting her team without conducting proper assessments, especially when the accused passenger was black or brown. The investigation, compiled by Marcia Cole, the airline's head of HR, left little room for interpretation. When the board reconvened, the decision was unanimous. Jordan Kemp, Lena Morell, and Renee Dalton would be terminated for cause: falsification of records, discriminatory behavior, and abuse of authority. Pamela Brooks would also be terminated for repeated, unresolved complaints regarding her conduct toward customers of color. When Malik read the final statement, a wave of relief washed over him. It was not joy, not satisfaction, but a quiet sense of accountability. Justice, even imperfectly, had begun. Still, the weight on his shoulders remained. He knew this was only the beginning. Firing individuals wouldn't erase the harm they caused. It wouldn't heal the passengers who'd been silently mistreated. And it wouldn't fix the systemic gaps that had allowed those behaviors to go unchecked for years. But it was a start. Across the company's workforce, the response was electric. Thousands of employees were watching. Some were nervous. Others, especially those from marginalized communities, felt a flicker of hope for the first time. Despite the outcome, the dismissed employees didn't go quietly. Jordan, Lena, Pamela, and Renee each threatened legal action. They called press outlets, painted themselves as scapegoats. They claimed they were following procedure, that they'd been thrown under the bus to protect the brand. Jordan, in particular, doubled down. He insisted he had done nothing wrong, that he felt threatened, and that he'd only flagged Malik out of caution. But the court of public opinion had already spoken. The videos were undeniable. The tone, the dismissiveness, the escalation, the thinly veiled contempt. Eventually, desperate to salvage some form of dignity, the 4 employees requested a private meeting with Malik. They wanted to clear the air, they said, apologize, explain. Ava Sinclair, ever cautious, advised against it. They could be trying to manipulate the optics, she warned. But Malik, thoughtful as always, agreed to meet, not for them, but for himself, for the people watching, for the principle that even confrontation deserved clarity. The meeting was held in a quiet conference room at the airline's corporate headquarters, a glass table, a wall of windows, 2 HR representatives present, Ava at Malik's side. When he entered the room, the energy shifted. Jordan sat stiffly, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Lena looked tense, defiant despite the circumstances. Renee clutched her purse tightly, eyes darting around the room. Pamela, pale and silent, stared down at the table. Malik took his seat calmly, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, his posture measured. No anger, no arrogance, just presence. Renee was the first to speak. Her voice trembled. I want to say I'm sorry. For how it escalated, I should have listened to the other passengers, but I trusted my crew. I regret not doing more. Pamela swallowed hard. Your name was flagged, she said softly. That's why I reacted the way I did. We're trained to be cautious. It wasn't personal. Malik gave her a long look. You refused to look at my confirmation. You didn't even consider that the system might be wrong. You told me to move aside like I didn't matter. Do you understand how that appears?" Pamela's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Yes." "I do now." Lena, voice cracking, said what Malik had heard far too many times in his life. "I'm not racist," she said. "Some of my closest friends are black. I just thought you were being difficult. We get people trying to sneak bigger bags in all the time." I didn't realize. Malik resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Instead, he inhaled slowly. "People do try to bend rules. I get that. But your tone, your refusal to check the facts, your threat to involve security, it wasn't standard enforcement. It was personal. Whether you meant it or not, your bias showed." Finally, Jordan spoke, his tone still tinged with bitterness. "I've worked gates for a decade," he said. "I know the type of passenger who tries to pull a fast one. You fit the profile." Malik's eyebrows rose. "Profile?" he asked. Jordan shrugged. "Young, flashy, confident, probably doesn't belong in business class. Those are the ones who cause trouble." A bitter laugh escaped Malik. "You mean black? That's what you're really saying." Jordan's face twisted, but he didn't reply. Malik sat for a moment in silence, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then he spoke, steady, unwavering. "What I experienced was the accumulation of all your unchecked assumptions, your biases, your unwillingness to pause and consider that maybe you were wrong." He looked at each of them in turn. "I accept your apologies. I hope you learn from this, but understand, the consequences stand. This wasn't a miscommunication. It was a systemic failure. And it ends now." None of them had anything left to say. As they stood to leave, Jordan paused at the door. He glanced back at Malik and muttered, "I guess this is karma, huh?" Malik met his eyes without blinking. "In a way, yes. But it can also be a turning point, if you choose to make it one." "You assumed I didn't belong because of how I looked," Malik said, voice low but unwavering. "That's not caution. It's prejudice. Plain and simple." A heavy silence gripped the conference room. No one spoke. Even Jordan Kemp, defiant just moments earlier, faltered. His cheeks turned a deep shade of red. He opened his mouth to say something, then shut it. Malik sat back slightly, drawing a long breath. "This is exactly what we're working to change," he said. "Whether or not you meant harm, your biases created an unjust and humiliating experience, not just for me, but for every passenger like me who doesn't have the voice or the power to push back." He let that land, slowly, deliberately. "I've received messages from people all over the country," he continued. "Black travelers, Latino families, Muslim women in hijabs, Asian Americans, all sharing how they were randomly flagged, ignored, or made to feel unwelcome. This is deeper than one incident. It's cultural, and it ends here." None of the four could meet his gaze. Lena Morrell dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her mascara faintly smudged. Renee Dalton looked down, fidgeting with the strap of her handbag. Pamela Brooks wrung her hands, lips pressed tightly. Jordan stayed stiff and silent, the fight slowly draining from his posture. Malik's tone softened slightly, but it never lost its firmness. "I accept your apologies," he said, "and I truly hope you take something away from this. But the consequences will stand. Our airline will not, cannot, keep employees who treat customers this way." He glanced at Marcia Cole, who stood behind him with Ava. "The damage you caused is deep," Malik added. "Not just to me personally, but to the trust this brand must rebuild. Every person who boards our flights deserves dignity, regardless of how they look or where they sit." The room stayed still. No one argued. By the end, the former employees rose slowly, murmured fragmented regrets, and shuffled toward the exit. Pamela and Lena each tried once more, asking quietly if there was any chance for reconsideration. But Marcia gently but firmly shook her head. "The decision is final," she said. At the door, Jordan paused. He glanced back at Malik, his voice barely audible. "I guess this is karma." "Huh?" Malik met his eyes without malice. "In a way, yes," he replied, "but it doesn't have to end here. It could be a turning point, if you let it." Jordan looked down, nodded once, and stepped out of the room. With the worst of the crisis behind him, Malik turned his full attention to rebuilding, not just the airline's reputation, but its internal soul. He began traveling, not for appearances, but for connection. At flight bases, employee lounges, and crew training centers, he showed up in person. No press, no fanfare, just Malik, often in rolled sleeves and casual dress, sitting with staff, listening. Some were ashamed. Others were angry at how their colleagues had behaved. Several were just scared, unsure if the old, unspoken rules were changing for good. Employees from marginalized backgrounds shared private fears that their concerns would continue to go unheard, that subtle slights and microaggressions would persist beneath the surface. Malik heard them, and he responded with action. A new department was created, Equity and Inclusion Services, a permanent division staffed with trained professionals in conflict resolution, anti-bias coaching, and employee advocacy. Complaints could now be reported anonymously, reviewed independently from supervisors. HR received expanded authority to open inquiries without red tape. Senior leaders were retrained. New hires went through empathy-based service workshops from day one. Quarterly culture reviews would now be standard, not just for performance, but for fairness and behavior. Soon, the changes began to show. The airline launched a bold new campaign. Not corporate spin, but stories from real staff members of all backgrounds. A mechanic born in Kenya, a pilot who wore her natural curls proudly, a gate agent who'd been afraid to come out, now smiling in full uniform beside his husband. The tagline was simple: "This airline belongs to everyone." Partnerships with Boeing, Airbus, and sustainability groups were highlighted to signal not just social transformation, but innovation, comfort, and forward thinking. Customer surveys ticked up. Internal morale steadied. Some media outlets praised Malik for turning a potential PR disaster into a moment of real industry reform. Others remained skeptical, waiting to see whether the culture change would last. Malik didn't mind. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was building trust, one policy, one team, one conversation at a time. In the quiet moments, though, Malik still felt the personal weight of it all. The birthday trip he never made, the seat he paid for but never got, the eyes on him judging, the moment he stepped off that plane, surrounded by silence and injustice. Eventually, he booked another flight, this time without announcing himself. When he arrived at his mother's home in Savannah Heights, the embrace she gave him erased the fatigue of the previous weeks. She held him close, tears in her eyes. "I saw it all," she whispered. "They did my boy wrong." Malik chuckled softly. "I'm okay, Mom, and it's changing now, I promise." She looked at him with pride swelling in her chest. "You didn't just take it, you turned it into something. That's what your father would have done too." Months later, the transformation continued. Malik returned to the newly renovated Skygate Terminal Lounge, the airline's flagship space at Jefferson Cross Regional Airport. Gone were the worn counters and half-hearted signage. In their place stood modern touchscreens, multilingual kiosks, inclusive artwork, and bold statements etched in silver above the concierge desk. Every journey deserves dignity. As he passed through the terminal, unnoticed this time, he spotted a quiet exchange at check-in. An elderly black woman in a navy blue church hat stood at the desk. Something was wrong with her reservation. The young gate agent leaned in, smiled warmly, and said, "Don't worry, ma'am, I've got you. We'll get you sorted, and I'll make sure you're comfortable. I'm so sorry for the trouble." The woman beamed. Malik stood at a distance and smiled too. That was what it was all about. Real culture change wasn't loud, it was consistent. It was quiet moments, repeated with care, until they became the norm. By now, every member of the airline staff had completed extensive inclusion training. From executives to gate agents, no one was exempt. And the difference showed. When Malik Carter walked through the doors of Jefferson Cross Regional Airport, there was no tension in his chest, no fear of being questioned, just a sense of calm purpose. He approached the check-in kiosk, typed in his details, and within seconds, a smooth tone confirmed his reservation. A business-class boarding pass slid from the machine without issue. It was unremarkable, and that was the beauty of it. While waiting to board, Malik noticed a small commotion a few gates down. An elderly black woman, dressed in elegant travel attire, stood at a counter, speaking to a young gate agent. There had been a minor system error with her booking. But instead of frustration or blame, the agent was patient and kind. "I'm so sorry about that, ma'am," he said, tapping calmly at the keyboard. "Let me fix it right away. In fact, how about a complimentary upgrade to thank you for your patience?" The woman's face lit up. She chuckled softly, and the two shared a warm smile. Malik watched, a soft grin spreading across his own face. It was a small moment, but to him, it meant everything. That exchange represented the cultural shift he had fought for. Not because someone was watching, not because of policy, but because it was the right thing to do. Staff members were going out of their way to show fairness, to create comfort, to remind every traveler, you belong here. When boarding was called, Malik approached the gate. No one blinked when he scanned his business class ticket. A flight attendant greeted him warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter," she said, taking his coat. "We're so glad to have you with us today." He thanked her and settled into his seat. Spacious, quiet, sun streaming through the window. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't on a plane in ages. Peace. The aircraft rolled down the tarmac and lifted into the air, gliding smoothly into the clouds toward a future that finally felt different. Not perfect, but better. In the end, the airline's leadership, together with Malik, had learned a powerful truth. Real transformation doesn't begin with apologies. It begins with accountability. It requires those in power to confront injustice, not avoid it. It demands transparency, not damage control. And it calls for action, not empty words. Malik had chosen not to walk away quietly. He could have handled it in silence, in back rooms, with lawyers in boardrooms. But instead, he chose to make it public. Not for revenge, but for change. He chose to stand where it mattered. Not just for himself, but for every passenger who'd ever been made to feel invisible. From the humiliation he endured that day to the wave of reform that followed, his journey had become something more than a personal victory. It had become a blueprint for leadership, for courage, for corporate responsibility. Through pain, he'd helped birth progress. Through bias, he'd demanded balance. Through hard karma, he had ignited a movement toward equity that extended far beyond the cabin doors of one flight. And so, to those watching his story, whether you're a frequent flyer or a quiet dreamer, someone who's experienced injustice or simply believes in fairness, let this be a reminder. Justice isn't abstract, it's personal. It's not about waiting for someone else to act. It's about choosing to act when the moment finds you, especially when the stakes are high. And it's about believing that the world can be better not by accident, but by intention.